Well, welcome everyone. My name is Vince Greco. I'm the Senior Director of Development for the Northeast and a parent of a 2017 graduate of this great United States Air Force Academy. This session is Defining Moments in Leadership, and it's my pleasure to welcome today's three panelists. We'll start off with Major General Retired Brian Bishop, class of 1983. Brian spent over 30 years in the Air Force, where he commanded at all levels, including the U.S. Air Force Air Demonstration Squadron, the Thunderbirds, the Wolfpack. Additionally, Brian served several staff tours at Headquarters Air Combat Command, Headquarters United States Air Force, the Joint Staff, and Headquarters United Nations Command, United States Forces Korea. Brian is currently a board member for the Association of Graduates and is the Vice President of Operations for Goulian Aerosports and Mike Goulian Aviation and the President of Brian T. Bishop and Associates, LLC. Brian Bishop. Next up, Lou Bremer, class of 1992. And let's give Lou a big round of applause because last night at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Lou was talking to me on my cell phone on his way to LAX to catch a red eye to be here this morning. Now, following his graduation from the Academy in 1992, Lou was commissioned in the U.S. Navy and served for 8 years as a Naval Special Warfare Officer, completing operational tours at SEAL Team 3 and SEAL Team 8. As a platoon commander, he led numerous classified multinational operations. Mr. Bremer has spent the past 20 years focused on defense and national security investments in the U.S. and emerging markets. He currently is a managing director at Cerberus Capital Management, where he invests in companies that leverage advanced technologies to enhance U.S. national security. Lou Bremer. Next up, Joel Thor Neeb, class of 1999. Joel is a former F-15 mission commander, United States Air Force. As an F-15 pilot, Joel escorted the U.S. president through the sky and flew missions to ensure the safety of the country after the attacks of 9/11. He was the tactical leader of 300 of the most senior combat pilots in the Air Force and oversaw the execution of a $150 million per year flight program. Joel was named the top instructor pilot at the Air Force Flight Training Headquarters, and he's flown thousands of missions teaching pilots from 25 countries around the world. Currently, Joel is the Chief Executive Officer at Afterburner. The objective at Afterburner is to help corporate teams grow stronger by using the same precision and accuracy as elite military aviators and special operations teams. Joel, thanks for being here. Joel Neeb. The format is pretty simple. I have a series of questions I will ask each of you, but I would like you to each elaborate on the same question because I think you all have a story to tell. We have no time limit. After this session, we will head for lunch. So let's start off with question number one. And Brian, why don't we start with you? This question really pertains to all of you and pretty much everybody in this room. All of you were taught from day one the core values at the Air Force Academy: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. There are defining moments in one's life when you learn something about yourself that you really didn't know. Can you share one of those experiences, whether it was at the Academy or later on in life, and do you still draw on that experience today? Brian?
So I would say there's probably multiple defining moments at different times and at different phases at every part of my career when, teaching the core values from the Academy, and they actually became our core values after I became an officer, really. But having those core values and having them embedded in the Academy made me who I am today and made me do a lot of the things that I do. And I think, I'll talk one about integrity. And as a young captain, I was very, very fortunate to be an aide-de-camp to 9th Air Force Commander General Mike Nelson. And he taught me some things about integrity that I just didn't really get as a captain. You know, I'm a young fighter pilot, F-16 pilot. My hair's on fire. I can do no wrong. Everything that I do is just, trust me, I am the best pilot you know. Just ask me, I'll tell you. So he brought me in as his aide, and a couple things happened, just little teeny things that I just didn't realize. And so the downtown community was really, really open at Shaw Air Force Base. Wonderful, wonderful community. And he just got moved into the house at Shaw Air Force Base, moved in and everything. And one of the community leaders downtown left like 3 cases of Coke and Diet Coke on his front step. And he looks at me and says, Brian, I need you to take this away. I need you to go give it to the security forces. I said, why? He says, because I can't accept it. I said, what do you mean? It's below the limit of what you can accept? Of course you'd accept it. He goes, no, it's the perception. It's the perception of a 3-star general getting favors from the local community. He said, I can't even let that kind of perception out there. Continue on. I'm working with him. He and I are getting ready to take a trip to Europe. He's going to speak at the Pakistani Air War College, and Mrs. Nelson was going to meet us in London. He was going to speak at a school in London and do some stuff with the RAF. And he sent a message down to the chief of staff, actually saying, hey boss, I'm going to be out these days, and these are the things that I'm doing, and I'm going to fly my wife over. I'm paying for my wife to come over, and then she's going to come back with us on the airlift to bring back, and I'm going to pay for her portion of the airlift. And the chief basically said, I wouldn't recommend you do that because it just doesn't look right. And so even though the entire trip for bringing the wife over was completely legal, well within the guidelines of all the ethics regs and everything that we have followed, he decided not to do that because of the perception that was out there. And as a young captain, for me, I took a serious lesson in life on that. And so as things played out in my career later on, and I was afforded some opportunities that I thought, well, that looks like it's pretty legal to me, I actually turned them down because of what General Nelson taught me.
Lou?
Is this thing on? Test. So, like Brian, I think numerous examples I could cite, but I'll go back to the academy because as Chad and Chris and Lisa talked about in the last panel, it really is a laboratory of leadership, right? And you really get to sort of experience different things throughout your 4 years. It can be formative experience that you can take into your later years. So as some may know in this room, I was a bit of a black sheep. I sort of got interested through a series of events in special operations. And I went to the Air Force Academy planning to fly. I wanted to fly F-15s, be a fighter jock. And a guy named Tom DeLeppa, who was a senior in my squadron at the time when I was a freshman in 8, got the only billet out of the Air Force Academy for combat control. And everybody's talking about how cool that was. And I grew up in Louisiana, first in my family to go to college. My dad's retired senior master sergeant in the Air Force. I didn't know what combat control was. I didn't know what a Navy SEAL was. I think I probably knew what a Green Beret was because John Wayne played one of the movies, And so I had to try to figure out, how do I get there from here, being a cadet at the Air Force Academy? Because after doing my due diligence, I said, if I'm going to go down this path and not be a pilot, I want to be the best of the best, and that happens to be in another service called the U.S. Navy. And that seemed like a daunting challenge, and there was no formalized path. So I was in this process where I had to figure it out. And honestly, looking back, I have no idea how I figured it out, at the age of 20 at the Air Force Academy. There's some sort of funny mini stories along the way, not the least of which was when I set up a meeting with the head of summer programs, because I found out about this program called Mini Buds. Mini Buds is basically 4 weeks of SEAL training where you go out and you get your teeth kicked in, they get a chance to look at you, figure out whether or not you're material for BUDS, which is basic underwater demolition SEAL training. You get a chance to see what that's all about before you take one of those coveted officer billets to the community. And so it's just a great program for sort of insight, making sure that people are making proper decisions that actually matter. So I set this meeting up and I go in to see this guy, just classic scene. He was probably early 50s, in great shape, was an Air Force major, so that didn't connect. I'm like, okay, early 50s, striking blonde hair, blue eyes, Air Force major, and he's running submarine programs at the Air Force Academy. I didn't find this out until later, but he was prior Army and prior Marine Force recon, had done multiple tours in Vietnam. Okay, I didn't know this when I went into the meeting, right? They're like, Cadet Bremer, what can I do for you? So I go on transmit mode, right? I'm talking about, there's this organization called the Navy SEALs, and they have this program called BUDS, and there's this other program called Mini BUDS, and I would really like to go to Mini BUDS, blah, blah, blah. I'm just on transmit mode, and he's just sitting there looking at me, So I finally shut up, and he doesn't say a word. He opens up his drawer, rifles through it, picks up a stack of paperwork about this thick and throws it across the table and says, go read this and then come back and tell me if you still want to be a SEAL. Well, there were numerous articles on not just BUDS, but also SFQ course, combat control, pararescue, basically a genre of special operations. And that was like throwing gas on the fire. So I came back and said, yes, definitely want to do it. He created that summer program for me. That was a very important step. Fast forward the tape. This is one of the big lessons. I had to submit a packet October 1st of my senior year requesting the cross commission and the billet to BUDS. And the way this works is when you drop your packet, you go to the very bottom of your cadet ranking for Air Force jobs. So if it gets denied, you end up last, which, no offense to missileers, but it means you're sitting in a missile silo in the Midwest, right? The last choice of Air Force jobs, they got to fill those. Good if you want to go get your grad degree, right? But if you wanted to be, doing something sort of kinetic, flying A-10s or flying F-15s or being a special operations, probably not the best choice. Well, for me, I was in a little bit of trouble with the academy. Burned a guy's Soviet flag who was an actual cadet going to the academy on taxpayer dollars, got in a bunch of trouble for that. Yeah. So my packet had one very important letter of recommendation that had to go in there from an Air Force 05 F-15 pilot who was my Group AOC. Now, F-15 pilots, are gods when it comes to selection stuff like this. And my letter of recommendation was 5 sentences long and started with Cadet Bremer has performed below average as a cadet, period. Okay. So I got that letter. It had to go in my packet. The day I got it, I ran to the South Gate and back, which is 15 miles round trip, drafted a very neutral letter, set up a meeting with him, tried to get him to sign it. Basically, Cadet Bremer has evaluated his options and really wants to do this, and I support it. He refused to sign it. And so now I'm in a position where I have to submit, if I want to pursue this, I have to submit that packet with that deal killer, in my view, letter recommendation, and run the risk of going to the very bottom of cadet selection out of the Air Force Academy. But the lesson that I sort of learned and I've taken into my professional life after that is, sometimes you have to be all in. And sometimes you have to be willing to take some disproportionate risks to go after what you want. So I said, this is what I want to do, and I submitted that packet. And there's some other funny stories along the way, but ultimately this ended up working out, and I was able to go pursue that opportunity, and that was sort of a life-changing thing. So, up there.
That's great. Joel, defining moment that you didn't know you had that you maybe learned at the academy or later on?
So from a transformative moment perspective, I think we can all come up with probably a dozen of them through the academy and through our service time, and just over and over again how we were proven wrong with what we thought we could do versus what we were capable of doing. But the one I'll pick on is when I'm about halfway through pilot training, and now I'm flown the T-37 way back in the tweet days, and getting into the 38 and hitting afterburners for the first time and taking off down the runway. And I'm 23 years old, and it strikes me that I've got no business doing this. That the type of person that I was in high school, the type of person that, I was a smart kid and I was good in athletics and stuff, but there's absolutely no reason why 23-year-old Joel Neeb should be going faster than the speed of sound in an airplane with his closest friends. And it struck me what had really taken place over the last couple of years and how we'd gotten to this point. Well, first of all, it reminds me of who here has seen the movie The Karate Kid back in the day? Let's see if this will resonate. All right, so Karate Kid, Ralph Macchio, right? He's the kid who's trying to learn karate, and Mr. Miyagi is teaching him to do karate by painting the fence and the stuff with the car, and it's really frustrating because he wants to learn how to do karate. but he's just getting this rote training that he doesn't respect. Well, by the end of the movie, the big payoff is that we realize that he was being taught karate the entire time. He's being taught the principles by doing all these other things that he needed to do in order to be successful. That's how I felt flying down the runway at 300 miles an hour and getting ready to take off. All these principles that, if I'm being real honest, I was frustrated with while I was at the academy. I wasn't a great cadet. Once again, had no reason doing this, but they set me up for this moment. And Chad said it earlier. He said, we learn by doing. And I totally agree with that. It has to be experiential. We have to put ourselves out there and actually put the principles at test. But it was the preparation and the principles that got me ready for that moment. And I don't think we quite realize just how magnificent that is, because we are all in the mix of it and we see it from the inside. But if you look at it from the outside, how long does it take to create mastery? What does Malcolm Gladwell say? Anybody remember what he says? Yeah, the 10,000 hour rule, right? And he gives all these examples of how the Beatles had to play in all these seedy joints before they were good enough to go play in front of groups. And he talks about sports players and all the things they had to do. And this 10,000 hours kept coming up again and again and again and again. And yet I hadn't been in an airplane for 10,000 hours. I certainly hadn't mastered it, but I gotten to the point where I'm in the top 1% of flyers in the world because of this program that I've been put through, because of the principles that have been put in front of me. And it went back to that core value, excellence in all we do. And for me, it proved to me that there were clear pathways to success, and the academy had set me up for that moment. It wasn't 10,000 hours in the airplane. I had 100 hours in the airplane at that point, and yet I had progressed further than I ever thought possible. And so excellence in all we do. Aristotle says that excellence is a habit, that it's something, we are what we repeatedly do. And so we can create excellence through habits. The academy created those principles and those habits for me. The pilot training program I was in reinforced that. I think one of the most damaging things that we can tell kiddos as they're getting ready to graduate from high school is probably the most common thing that we hear at a graduation address, right? You can be anything. The sky's the limit. Just go pick something and go after it. And I think that's so destructive because it implies that it's within them to find that path. One of the things that I value so much about the academy is it provided the structure and the principles to not push me down that path and tell me, you go figure out how to fly an F-15. It wasn't a push mechanism, it was a pull mechanism. It was a system that pulled myself and others like me that had no business doing the things that we were doing through this system, and we were spit out on the other side, close to mastery, much faster than the 10,000 hours. And I'll never forget that transformative moment, and I've carried it with me into everything that I've attempted since then. And it's the reason that I have my son sitting out front right now, because I want him to see what the principles look like as he starts on his journey to pursue mastery.
Vince, can I jump on the learning by doing thing? It's taken me a few years since retiring and to reflect on a lot of things that have gone on in my career. Because now you have time to do that, right? When you're in the Air Force, you're running 3 ways from Sunday, and sometimes you don't have time to really think about it. But one of my career assignments was to be the OG at the Air Force Academy and actually run the airfield, which was absolutely one of the best jobs you could ever imagine. You get this window, looks out on the Rampart Range, you're looking over an airfield, you got airplanes flying around, you got gliders flying around, you got kids jumping out of airplanes. Oh my gosh. And then you think about it, it has nothing to do with teaching young men and women how to jump out of airplanes or how to fly gliders or how to fly powered airplanes. It has everything to do with leadership and character development. That's what the entire program is there for. It's absolutely incredible. Think about it. You've got a 20-something-year-old kid teaching another 18 or 19 or 20-something-year-old kid to jump out of an airplane without a static line, free fall for your first time. And by the way, I think we're one of 2 schools in the entire world that can do that.
Without an instructor.
Without a jump master. That's just stupid crazy. But we do it, and we have an injury rate that's like less than 1/2% or something like that. That's crazy. Back in many of our days, when one of the transformative experiences of my time at the academy was when Frank Gorns, now retired 4-star Frank Gorns, Comrade Gork, walked across the POW compound and picked me up by one hand and slammed me up against a wall, and my feet were dangling underneath me. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing here? But even the SERE program, even our Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape program is a leadership laboratory for cadets to go in and understand and practice leadership and make all the mistakes that you can make in your entire leadership experience and come out of it and graduate with a clean piece of paper. It's absolutely incredible what the opportunities available. You take the leadership structure inside the cadet wing, the cadet wing commander, the squadron commanders, the group commanders. The whole thing is such an amazing experience.
Well said. I think one of the things that Joel said is the academy sets you up for success. They don't set you up for failure. And one of the great things about my job, and I spent Wednesday doing it with the grad, we walked around, we went to the cyber department, we talked to Colonel Merritt, we were in foreign languages, we were in the Center for Educational Innovation. We walked and talked to our honors program head. There are so many amazing things going on at that school right now that the general public just doesn't understand. There's some great people teaching today's cadets things that all of you might not even comprehend. That's how far advanced they have become. When I look at these professors, both military and civilian professors, I think to myself, my goodness, look at how they're molding our future cadets, our future officers. Did you gentlemen at some point, and maybe it wasn't at the academy, maybe it was before the academy, maybe it was while you were there or after, did you have a mentor or somebody in your life that helped you define who you are and the leader that you have become today? Is there one person that you could talk about, academy, high school, or beyond? Joel?
So it's two leaders, and it was in my first F-15 squadron, and now wars are kicking off. And when I was at the academy through '99, pretty peaceful times, and then all of a sudden we were thrust into war as I was graduating from pilot training. And it was this group of men, Joe Pritchard and Stretch, and they were just phenomenal leaders. But what was most impressive to me was how they approached leadership from two perspectives. They knew that they've never articulated this, but I think they would say it somewhat similar, that teams, just like kids, need two things: love and boundaries. And they were exceptional at providing both of those. So Joby Pritchard, who was the commander, was great at being our cheerleader and telling us how fantastic we were doing and pushing us along and motivating us and inspiring us and telling us what we were going to go out and accomplish. And then Stretch was the DO. And we didn't like Stretch because he was the one who was providing the boundaries, and he was the one telling us what we're doing wrong and why we needed to get better. But what I didn't understand is that behind the scenes, as a young leader myself, what I didn't understand is that behind the scenes, they were both the same person. They're fulfilling the same role. Either one of them could have stepped in the other's shoes and provided either the boundaries or the love. But they knew that that's what was required as leaders in order to transform people, to transform a team. That it's about telling them they can do it, but at the same time pushing the goalposts out a little bit further and ensuring that you provide a process for them to get outside of their comfort zone, get uncomfortable, get comfortable being uncomfortable, and then transition from a dependence on others into an independence, being able to do things on your own, and then into that most important state that all of us have experienced hopefully at one point on an elite team, and that's interdependence. And that's where you're depending on each other to be more than anything that you could be on your own. And if you think back to those times in your life when you were on an elite team and accomplishing something bigger than yourself, that's quite a special feeling, and you never forget that. And when people can activate that within a group, and you see leaders that can pull that off. And I saw it again and again throughout my Air Force career. This is just the first exposure. You just marvel at the ability of leadership to really transform an entire team.
Yeah, I can't really look to any one individual other than, I would say, my father, honestly. Growing up in a household where I had a senior enlisted father who, didn't mince words and laid down the foundation on basic things like, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Small things like that are formative in a young man's brain, that I think affects every element of your life. And then obviously, during my 8 years in the SEAL community, I was very fortunate to work with some of the best military officers out there. Bill McCraven, who I think everybody knows now, especially after giving that commencement address at University of Texas, was my second commanding officer at SEAL Team 3, followed by Bob Harward. And then when I deployed into Bosnia-Herzegovina, I worked for Ed Winters and was chopped over from Unit 2 in Stuttgart, Germany by Sean Pybus. So all these 4 individuals went on to become 3 or 4-star admirals in the Navy. Tremendous leaders who set the tone. And let me tell you what's really tough. When you enter the SEAL teams and you go into a platoon and you're the second O, so typical formation of a SEAL platoon, certainly back then, was 14 or 16 guys broken down into 2 different squads of 7 or 8. So if it's your first platoon, you're the second squad commander. So you're the platoon assistant officer in charge, and you're the squad leader of the second squad. Well, in that squad is the platoon chief. And that platoon chief probably has 15 years of combat experience under his belt, probably minimum 7 combat deployments, but you're the guy that's in charge. Let me tell you, that is varsity right there, because you can't have ineffective leadership in that sort of unit, and a SEAL chief will call you out every time if you're not doing the right thing. And so trying to balance leadership from the perspective of taking the advice from the senior enlisted guy who's been there, done that, but never allowing him to cross that line to think that he can tell you what to do, that's tough. But it goes back to the Air Force Academy being a laboratory of leadership where you're thrust into these various circumstances. You learn how to overcome adversity. You learn how to listen. You learn how to lead, be a follower, and be a leader. Helps you through those sort of things. So I'm eternally grateful for the leaders that I had a chance to work under and work for, because I got something from every one of them that informed that foundation that took me off into future activities.
Brian?
I have to echo with Lou here. There wasn't really one. I mean, General Nelson was one for me for a little while, but there were so many that impacted who I end up becoming as a leader. And I would tell you, I think the vast majority of them were not superiors. I think the vast majority of them were either subordinates of mine that called me out on an integrity issue or something like that, where you're closing down the ending of the flying hour program, and you're supposed to fly your 1.2 today because that's what the ops officer told you, and you really flew up 1.3. And your wingman calls you up and says, I can't log a 1.2 because that's not my integrity. My integrity says we flew a 1.3 today. I go, yep, you're right. Or when my command chief as a wing commander would pull me into the office and say, hey boss, you've got X, Y, and Z going on out here right now, and you need to understand that you saying that in this setting is probably not going to go very well. Okay. I've been very, very blessed to have some chiefs pull me aside at different times in my career. One in particular, I was a wing commander at Kunsan Air Base at the Wolfpack, and walked into my first Article 15, where I had to give a young airman an Article 15, and I totally pooched it because I hadn't thought about it. I thought, I can get through this. All I got to do is read the thing to him and, say a few words and get him out the door. And my chief pulled me aside afterwards and said, hey, boss, you might want to think about this again. I said, well, how to do it? He goes, not very well. He says, you had a real opportunity to impact this young airman and get him on the right course of action by doing it maybe this way or maybe suggesting some things here. And he completely changed the way that I thought about administering discipline and trying to help airmen versus sometimes I think we just administer the discipline and hope they figure it out themselves.
Joel, you talked about, as a 23-year-old, sitting in the cockpit, going the speed of sound, and you had no business being there right away. Lou, you've been in the field of battle many times. Do you all believe that defining moments don't make a man or a woman? They simply reveal what's already inside. Did you ever have those moments in the field or in the cockpit that you were scared, you were nervous, but it was there. Do you feel like that defining, it's there? Does everybody have it? Or is it something special that you gentlemen and the people in this room have? Start with you, Lou.
Yeah, I don't think it's either or. I think we are all a product of both our innate characteristics that you're born with. You know, it's sort of the question: are leaders born or are they made? I think it's both. I think you're born with certain innate characteristics, and then your life experiences develop those innate characteristics to make you the leader that you are. So, to deny the effect of those experiences, I think would be really misguided. Because that's the laboratory that you're really honing your skills. So, you know, to me, it's really the combination, and that goes back to, again, to the uniqueness of the Air Force Academy or any of the service academies, including that lesser known service academy called West Point. I've got a buddy over there, class of '93. Yeah, so I think those experiences bring out the totality of what's been developed up to that point, and then becomes additive to who you are as a leader. And you take that to the next experience, and the same thing happens. You take it to the next experience. And so that's how I think any one of us develop as leaders. And that sets you up for the next opportunity too. Some of you guys may have seen in the press, but Trump nominated me for Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict. That's a Senate confirmed position. That came with a whole bunch of challenges, including some real negative press. It was an 18-month process. Testified in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. My friend John was a big part of that whole effort. He was basically my consigliere through that time. And, that's a different arena. You go from being a private citizen to a public citizen. You're seeing your name written in the Washington Post and New York Times in a very negative light. Based upon things that are completely unrelated. But you can rely on those experiences that lead up to that point, combined with the things that you're taught at a very young age that become foundational, that get you through those sort of moments.
Brian?
I completely agree. It's a combination of a bunch of factors, but at the same time, I think you have to be willing to look internally and draw upon yourself so that you can reach down deep when you have to, as Chad and the athletics panels talked about, some of the grit that you got to get to make that your 3rd and 1. It's Navy. Who's gonna stop it? One of the things that Siri taught me was that I could reach a whole lot deeper than I ever thought I could. And that allowed me to reach deeper at different times when you had challenges, leadership challenges, of your own. Specifically, I have a very, very dear friend of mine who, when I was going to be a wing commander, I asked her a question, and she was a wing commander ahead of me. And she said, Brian, here's the deal. She said, the thing about being a wing commander is you never get to have a bad day. And yeah, I mean, I had some bad days, and there were some days I walked back into my little hooch and I was just exhausted, and you had some major conflict going on, internally or human related or something like that. But yeah, you still had to come out there the next day and be a cheerleader for the entire wing and make sure that they were ready to go do the things they needed to do. And yes, I had to reach deep and find some things inside me to recharge my tank, put fuel back in my tank, because I've had another friend. He says, how many squadron commanders or how many wing commanders came out to us and said, if you just give me 110% every day, we'll be fine. It's not possible. I can't give you more than 100%. In fact, on a good week, if I can give you an average of 70%, that's probably doing pretty good. But we don't think about it that way, do we? It's always give you 110% every day. Mav and I were talking here a little bit earlier about leaders that in the Pentagon or anywhere actually, if you're not in before them and you don't stay after they leave, they think of you as a lesser officer. But yet we sit here and profess, you got to take care of your family, you got to take care of yourself, you got to do the things that you need to do to put fuel back in your tank. But yet the actions that leader is displaying is not allowing you to do that. Get a workout in, as long as it's on your own time. I mean, how many times have we heard that? So, but to your point, I think is you got to be willing to ask yourself to dig deep for that when you need it.
Joel?
So I think it might be helpful to define transformative moments as we look at whether they reveal what's already there or they transform us in the process. For me, transformative moments are really the valleys in life, right? Because that's where real transformation occurs. And the accolades, the things we do well, that's not where transformation occurs. It's where the years of transformation are revealed in that moment. And so I'll talk a little bit about a valley that I had and how it equates to this. So I talked about a 23 years old flying faster than the speed of sound, had no business doing it. And by the way, that was a valley as well, because once again, I had that voice in the back of my head saying, you can't do this. I had, all of the challenges of pilot training and the fears, of very, very primal fears for your life as you're going out there and doing cloverleafs by yourself in an airplane. It's a ton of fun. It's exhilarating, but at the same time, don't let anybody tell you that they weren't terrified the first time that they tried it as well. And so that was 23. At 33, I found out I had stage 4 cancer. And not just cancer, but a ridiculously rare type of cancer, that first one in the Air Force ever to get it. And I was given about a 15% chance to live. And I was told to expect to live about 18 months at this time. And that was a valley of all valleys for me. And out of nowhere, that one came. And in that moment, there's a great phrase that the dying have the most to teach us about life. And I think that's true because at the end of life, when everything is stripped away, when all of the noise and the distractions and the silliness and the stuff that we all pay attention to and we know we shouldn't is stripped away, you're left with what's most important and what should have been most important all along, right? And for me, I had a couple of epiphanies at this time as I'm effectively facing my end of life, my proverbial deathbed for a couple of years. One of them was that this transformative moment for me showed me that I wasn't that proud of the things that I thought I would be at my end of life. I wasn't that proud of the awards on the wall, of the title of fighter pilot, or the things that I thought were so important to me because they fed my ego in the past. I realized that they meant nothing. But I was deeply, deeply proud of the times that I was on an inspiring team with an incredible mission ahead of us, whether that was at the Air Force Academy and the men and women that I was surrounded by, and we were doing something that was bigger than ourselves and we couldn't believe we were pulling it off and just trying to get through this program, the mission that we had there, or as a fighter pilot and what I was called to do, or as part of my family with the incredible team I'd surrounded myself by and the children that my wife and I created. And that was what gave me happiness. And so I believe that we carry the principles into those valleys and the transformative moments, and they certainly help us through those. But I also believe that those transformative moments, if we're listening closely and realizing that this valley has something to teach us, it also reveals the truths that we don't get a glimpse into outside of that. I often say that I would not go through cancer again. And I should add here, by the way, I'm in remission, completely feeling great. That was 10 years ago. Yeah, thank you. So stage 4 is never really gone, right? So they tell you that the thing I get, they never say you're cured. They say no evidence of disease, NED, on all of my stats. And so I have to go back all the time. That's a bit of a blessing. I'll tell you why, because it always keeps it in the back of my mind that I don't have enough time. But the thing is, none of us have enough time, right? And so I'm extremely thankful for cancer. I'll say that, I wouldn't go through cancer again for $1 million. It was horrific. It was every bit of a nightmare that you can imagine it would be. But I wouldn't give up the lessons I learned from cancer for $100 million, because that valley transformed me in ways that I would take too long to even talk about up here. And I think I'm not unique. My story is dramatic, and it's highlighted by an event. But we all have those valleys in our lives, and we all are survivors of something, and we're left changed because of the transformative moments, if we allow them to change us.
Amen to that.
Right. I think I can speak for everybody here that you're blessed. We're blessed that you're here. You're healthy, and thanks for being here. Great story. Any questions from our audience? I'm tired of hogging the microphone. Anybody have a question for these gentlemen? I can keep talking. All right, I'll give you one more. We've talked about defining moments in leadership, and you've all given excellent examples of that. Can you recall any experiences throughout your career that you maybe learned a lesson in bad leadership and what not to do? And could you share that with our group? And Brian, maybe you already did with the Article 15 and the airmen, but do you have any more, Brian?
I learned more from bad leaders than I did the good ones. I mean, it's crazy. Yes. I'm trying to figure out how to tell the story without giving away the names. Let's just say that it was at a headquarters somewhere, and I was on the staff. I was in Korea. I was in the deputy chief of staff of the United States Forces Korea, and I had an Army 4-star who was let's just say I'm glad I'm in the Air Force. And nothing against my Army buddies. I love the Army. I love the Army. I just didn't agree with the way he executed his leadership. He had a tendency to fly off the handle at different events and do things in a way that did not inspire his staff to want to come in and actually want to be there with him. And I would tell you, did things that made the staff not want to report things to him. Not that we didn't report things. So don't get me wrong. Don't take the lesson the wrong way. But you didn't genuinely feel like you wanted to walk into his office and say, "Hey, boss, I need to tell you about something today," because you're afraid of what was going to happen. You didn't know whether you're going to get Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde that particular day. And I learned a lot from that. And I learned, probably one of the biggest things I learned early in my career. And I learned at the Air Force Academy. The single biggest lesson I learned during recognition week at the Air Force Academy was an upperclassman came up to me. And you know how it is that you're going through recognition week and everybody's yelling at you, and you're going to do more push-ups than you've ever done in your entire life, 10 at a time or whatever it was going to be. And you're just, all you're trying to do is get through the 2 or 3 or 4 days that it's going to be. And I had one upperclassman come up to me, and of course, there's all this yelling going around. And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Bishop, you disappointed me today." And he turned around and walked away. And that just about tore my heart out. I was like, holy cow. He didn't yell at me. He just told me I disappointed him. That taught me a lesson about leadership that I took on through the rest of my career, that I feel that the more effective leaders are the ones that are there that come at you, that are very calm, they're very steady. They're not going to react to situations, and they're not going to fly off the handle. They're going to listen to what you have to say. And they may disagree with you, but when given when given an exercise or when given a problem, and they call the command post in, and the command staff comes in, they're not yelling and telling them, "Go do this, go do this, go do this." They're sitting back, listening to what the staff is telling them, listening to the information, and then making very clearly, well laid out decisions, and doing it in a manner that is in a relatively calm, but expeditious as necessary manner.
Joel.
Sure, so I'll tell myself a little bit for a leadership challenge that I had early on. When I was a young instructor pilot instructing in the same program that I graduated from not so recently, not so long ago really. And when I went through the program, I wasn't really impressed with the instructors. They're kind of jerks, and I thought there was an opportunity for the instructors to lean into our development a little bit more, and in one in particular that I didn't really respect it, but now I was on the other side of that table and I was an instructor with them. And so fast forward a bit, I'm the instructor that I always wanted to have. I am the class's buddy, and I'm really leaning into developing them and feeling like I'm being the type of person I would have wanted when I was a student. And you can probably predict the outcome here. So they had seen me more as a peer and less as a leader at a time when I really needed to be a leader. And I really needed them to respect me. And the clear reason why was because lives were on the line, and their lives were on the line. Because I was assessing whether or not they were ready to go out and fly and do it safely and do it the right way. And yet we hadn't established clear boundaries. Once again, that boundaries piece for leadership was my lesson early on. If you neglect one side or the other, there's some pretty predictable outcomes that'll happen in a negative way. And then I'll close the loop on that other instructor too, who I thought was a bit of a pain. So he was the type of person that would allow you to get into bad situations, what I thought looked like a bad situation in an airplane, and scare you a little bit. Well, I was wrong. I was completely naive. I was too young to know this. But what was really taking place, because I talked to behind the scenes, I said, why would you let these things go so far? I felt like we were about to crash on that landing or doing that rejoin in formation. And say, I always had a factor of safety. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was allowing you, once again, learning by experience, to get into a place where you were afraid and you taught yourself the lesson, because these words I've never forgotten these words that came out of my mouth next. It has to sting a little bit for us to learn. And I thought, wow, that's such a powerful lesson. And, that's once again the power of getting outside of your comfort zone. And as a leader, I only wanted to provide the love, and I only wanted to, make this easy for my students. And I missed the fact that I wasn't allowing them to develop because I wasn't providing the boundaries. I wasn't allowing it to sting a little bit for them and allow them to develop the way they need to.
Lou, let's wrap it up with you.
Yes. I've seen countless examples of bad leadership. I've certainly had my own leadership challenges too, as everybody in this room undoubtedly has. And I think one of the common denominators that I've seen in bad leaders really does come down to whether or not they care for their people, right? If you don't care for your people and all you're worried about is your own optics, managing up how you look, that's going to manifest itself in a lot of negative ways. I've seen really tough leaders who care about their people who were highly respected, right? So pushing your guys and developing your guys or your gals and really getting the best out of them might feel tough to the individuals at the time, but that's great leadership, right? And if you don't care, in the example that Brian shared about your guys, and you're not approachable, and all you care about is sort of how you look to the boss, and you're willing to throw your subordinates under the bus to look good in that way, that's sort of the classic example of a horrible leader. I've seen plenty of them. We have them in the SEAL teams. They're in various parts of the military. Fortunately, they're not the majority, but they do exist. So as we go out in our lives, we all learn this lesson at the academy, take care of your people, whether that's in a corporate setting or otherwise. And sometimes taking care of your people is doing the things that they don't want you to do, pushing them in ways that make them uncomfortable, but developing them as professionals too. That's incumbent upon all of us as leaders.
Well, gentlemen, we really appreciate you being here today. We picked these three panelists. They've done an awesome job, but I am certain that everybody in this room probably could sat up here and shared some kind of defining moment in leadership. And I feel a big part of that, if you look around this room, you all are in a unique fraternity. That long blue line has taught you life lessons from the day you were at the academy to the day you're sitting in this room. So thank all of you for your service and your time. Gentlemen, we want to thank you in particular for being up here today and being with us and flying across the country. That concludes this session. But hold on, Joel has a question or a statement.
Do you mind if we take about a minute to talk about one thing that Brian and I were talking about behind the scenes, and that's about engagement?
Go right on ahead. This is what we're here for.
My microphone? No, I'll talk loud. So Brian and I were talking during the break, and one of the things we talked about, first of all, how amazing this was, and the other panels that went before us, I was just so blown away by how you connected the dots between all the different things that I've seen in my experience from the military to the corporate world and everywhere else. And then it made us think, why isn't there more engagement? This should be so much more. Our network and the people that we have, that we graduated with, and the foundation that we came from, the principles that we started with, are so amazing, and yet it feels like the engagement and the mobilization isn't what it could be. And Brian, you had a couple of stats that you were able to highlight because of your role on the board. You want to talk a little bit about what you see?
I think it took us 3 or 4 years of active work to try to get a change in the bylaws to work the single CEO concept with the foundation and the AOD, correct about that? And I believe that the representation of the voting in the last election was about 27% of the total membership. To me, that's an astoundingly low number. When Chad was talking about other institutions, that it's part of your culture that you just naturally give back to the institution after you graduate. That's one of the things Joel and I were kind of talking about, and Bill, you said it best when we were standing out there. I think the bones are there relative to going in.
I was just giving a quick story that I got to experience recently in the past couple of weeks. We've all watched Afghanistan and been deeply troubled by what we've seen as people are left behind back there. But what I saw take place behind the scenes is much more important to me, and that's how our group of graduates from whether the Air Force Academy, West Point, or Annapolis, all really galvanized behind the scenes and got stuff done and spent 24/7 ops to get people home. And by the way, I have to say I took no part in this. I just observed it. This is just me in my observations. But what they accomplished, and I'll give you one quick example. So we got a phone call a couple weeks ago from somebody who's working in the White House fellow, and says we've got a list of people that we're trying to get out, and the list is not secure. We're worried that it's going to be hacked right now. We need to talk to somebody in tech in order to get this secure. And we happen to work with some teams in tech, so we made a few phone calls. But more importantly, we called Otis Hooper, who's a 99 grad from the Academy. He's over at Salesforce. And he elevated this very quickly where it was on the CEO's desk at Salesforce and was able to get permission to put a team together and go secure this list of folks that needed to get out of Afghanistan. They worked around the clock. I have a picture on my phone of how they were able to communicate with people that needed to be rescued from this area because they had to be able to identify, obviously, and validate who this person was. And they were using Service Academy ranks on the soldiers to be able to show that that's the person to go talk to and to go, that'd be a friendly face to go approach and to share a picture of this. And just to watch this happen behind the scenes, to Brian's point, the bones are there. Like all of a sudden when the emergency occurred, everyone came together and we galvanized around it, and we don't see this 27% participation and folks that are not connected in this way. All of a sudden we moved mountains, and it was amazing to watch. And I just wonder how we can mobilize folks in a more deliberate way. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, and you're the ones who showed up, but I would challenge all of us to think about, how do we engage the rest of the community in a really meaningful way. A lot of things like that over and over.
Well said. It's time for lunch. I'm going to change hats real quick and put on my cheerleader hat. So tomorrow we have this little football game down the road. This football game is going to be on national TV. I mean national TV. It's CBS's Game of the Week. CBS puts on a game at the end of the year with Army and Navy. I think we all need to be a little loud tomorrow, a little cocky, and show CBS that there's another service academy besides Army and Navy. So go get your lunch, head out here, get to the game tomorrow, be loud, be proud, and thanks for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it.